It's like, do you want Thomas to record? And I'm like, no.
Yeah, save it for later. And where, but I guess, did you accept the recording? I didn't know you had
Action.
to do that.
Action.
Action. All right.
Action.
And we're off to a chapter 2 of Modern Man in Search of Soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Carl Jung.
Was a couple days late, but we're here, so let's get it. Um, so, chapter 2 is titled Problems of Modern Psychotherapy. And me, like when I was reading, it seemed like he was building, well, he was presenting analytical psychology
Mm-hmm.
by building off of the downfalls of various other techniques, but not but synthesizing them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, um, so I thought it was interesting. It was a lot to follow, though.
It was. And he also goes like back and forth, like he's following like this path to like kind of explain it, and then he'll go off, but then come back and then get back on the path. So
He does
that's
go
what kind of,
off.
yeah, that's what like mixed me up a little bit, and I would have to keep rereading stuff just to make sure I knew if I was like um understanding it. But yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that too. Like, is that what he's doing? Like, is he presenting a framework for analytical psychology or analytical, what is it, psychotherapy, or yeah,
Yeah,
psychology,
and
analytical psychology,
analytical psychology,
which is like
psychotherapy.
his version of psychotherapy, and then he compares that to like Freud's was psychoanalysis, which was probably the most popular at that time, right?
Yeah, but I feel like I feel like psychoanalytic approach is like it includes Freud too, significantly.
Right. But his was termed, he termed his own
Oh yes,
psychotherapy
yes, yes,
kind of like
yes.
analytical psychology. And that's all I'm
Uh-huh.
saying is Freud like was associated with psychoanalysis, traditional psychoanalysis. And he talks a lot about Freud. And then he also talked about individual psychology, which is um
Adler,
yeah, I can't remember his first name.
Alfred.
Um Alfred Adler, who created individual psychology because he did not, the unconscious is not a part of his framework.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big thing that came up in this chapter. So, and then and then Carl Jung has analytical psychology. And again, it was just interesting the way that this was presented because it's problems of modern psychotherapy. But I feel like he didn't just explicitly state, or at least I didn't feel this way. He didn't just explicitly state like these are some problems and let's talk about them. He did go into depth with building his own framework and presenting it, and
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it incorporates all these other psychotherapies. So it's very confusing sometimes because I was like, well, wait, what is the problem? Because he goes into like explaining them and breaking them down one by one, and then he like kind of talks about issues with it. But again, he never like, sometimes it's really hard for me to understand when he's just saying this is what it is and then this is the problem. It's almost like it's embedded in there and you really have to like work to understand it and pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just curious if you were having like any trouble with that the way that I was.
No, like from like you said, like the title of this chapter, like I was certainly more expecting a more of a straightforward like approach. Like here's this issue, so
Right.
these are all the issues, these are all the problems or expressions that stem from it and create problems, and then here's what you can do about it, kind of thing. But to me, what it seemed like he was doing was kind of like while he was identifying common problems, at the same time, some of those problems were associated and their associations with various theories that have been running, but he was building them, like synthesizing it together into this multi-step process that he laid out throughout this chapter of like what, because what he, to me, what he kind of did was attack, there's multiple levels of analysis that he was hitting on, like and the various uh, theories of therapy hit different levels of it,
Mm-hmm.
but create problems on other levels. And what he tried to do is kind of like, to me, it was like putting pieces of a puzzle together on when to use this fear, when to use Freud's ideas to, kind of get to the root of the neurosis, so to speak, and his own
Right.
ideas. And then when to, but then you solve the individual problem, and then you move up another level of analysis where you're still an individual within a society. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where Adler came in and was basically um, explaining and understanding how to move back to normality, so to speak, and um, move successfully in society.
Mm-hmm.
And then like there's another level, which I
Well, let's.
believe
Well,
was
you're calling them levels. Let's just say the stages real quick, because the
stages are better
stages.
than levels. Yeah.
This well, just for like for the sake of what the chapter was saying, and then like if anyone's listening, he pretty much states that there's 4 stages of psychotherapy as he's developing um, this like step by step process. And he says one is confession, and that's where he's talking a lot about Freud. And then the other one was explanation, which I didn't remember if that's where Adler came in or if Adler came in on the next stage, which was education. And then the fourth stage was transformation.
I think you're right about that. I think Adler was education.
Yeah. Yeah. I think confession and explanation were kind of like the first two that he goes, and then Adler comes in later. But anyway, those were the stages. And then he goes into like
Can you hear me? All right. Experienced a little technical difficulty there. We're back.
all right.
Um, yeah, you were saying just leaving off with the stages and uh, first stage or one stage, so to speak, confession, and then another stage explanation,
Mm-hmm.
another stage education,
Yeah.
and then more of a final stage, so to speak, transformation.
Right. Right. And yeah, I guess like this podcast is going to be me really just trying to, understand this a little bit more. Um, but like what I took from it is like there were things that were very effective with psychotherapy from these different schools of thought. And like you said, he is synthesizing a bunch of different things and creating his own. So like he takes pieces of Freud's psychoanalysis, at least the parts that are seem to be working, and then he points out the problems, which is the chapter. But
Mm-hmm.
like I said, it was just tough for me because he doesn't just lay out the problems. He does go in depth with explaining the good parts of it too. And I wasn't ready for that. I didn't know that that's the direction that Jung was going to take this.
Mm-hmm.
But he does kind of synthesize and present his own framework by selecting the various parts of these different schools of thought. And yeah, it was just really interesting and somewhat confusing at times, but I just
Mm-hmm.
thought it was really cool. Like I feel like he has, I like that he's critiquing a lot of this stuff, right? Like, I think that shows that he has experience in the field. And it also just shows that he understands all these different schools of thought enough to synthesize and create what he thinks is an even more effective um, approach to therapy. So I thought that was really cool, once I got through all of it. But
Mm-hmm. No, it was. I loved the ending, and I can't wait to get to it, where he leaves off and like basically points in the future direction of where he believes there's much to be benefited from. But I guess there's two quotes that I can read to kind of start out like his how he began the chapter, kind of the foundation that he laid before he went into it. Which one was, so when many different ways of approaching the psyche are recommended, we may rest assured that none of them leads with absolute certainty to the goal, least of all those advocated in a fanatical way. And then another quote that kind of builds off of that one is it is a small wonder, therefore, that efforts to attack this elusive riddle are multiplied. The elusive riddle being, I guess, understanding the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And first from one side and then from another, the variety of contradictory standpoints and opinions of which we have spoken is the inevitable result. So just then again, like kind of establishing or grounding ourselves in some humility and how complex psyche is, as
Mm-hmm.
we've kind of been talking about over the past couple episodes, um, and that to understand something so complex, you need to hit it from many different ways, and none of which will account for everything. And I think that's another this big thing that he says here is there's a continuous emphasis that I feel that he puts on um, even taking, you could say, this framework that he's put forward to not be sure not to take it as an absolute, thus to give give yourself the ability to perceive um, unexplored uh, psychic phenomena that don't fit properly instead of trying to force them into a framework and then not understand them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I feel like we could just read all the read the quotes and like just have an hour long podcast where you just read the chapter.
I love it. Um, I thought it was interesting in regards to kind of for our one of the stages confession, in that there's a strong relationship between the groundwork of psychoanalysis and um, religious institution in regards to you could say the cathartic um, experience of confession.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I've been interested in.
Yeah, like someone actually going to confession at church.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and again, I was just looking at that quote too. As soon as as soon as man was capable of conceiving the idea of sin, he had recourse to psychic concealment, or to put it in an analytical language, repressions arose.
I had that underlined too. It's a
Yeah,
good one.
yeah. And it's just crazy though, because like that does change everything, right? Like the idea of sin, this idea of right and wrong, this idea of now considering how to behave changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that was really cool.
It's interesting because that makes me think of like as if like concealment and confession are kind of opposites. As if once we gave rise to confession, we almost promoted concealment at the same time. But I don't think that's the right way to think about it. Like I think they both exist regardless. Maybe it can be expressed in like an embodied like through action somehow. Um, but that just seems very difficult to describe. I'm pushing my limits right now. Um, like hot and cold. You need to understand one to understand the other.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I guess there are two things that have just always been there. You know what I mean? It's kind of
Right,
getting like
right.
zenny.
But like, but to establish the ideas of sin now makes you think about all the things that you maybe are concealing,
Mm-hmm.
or also because I think the idea of sin and religion also goes hand in hand with culture and being social and interacting with other people and experiencing things, and not always like not that repressions didn't exist, kind of like you were saying, this idea of like repression was always there, but now there was this avenue to explore what was being repressed.
Mm-hmm.
And in one way it was the confessional and more religious, but it he's saying that's no different than psychology and analysis and tapping into those things that you're holding, right? Like that you're
Mm-hmm.
keeping in the unconscious.
Um, oh yeah, and to dive into um, concealment, so to speak, there's another quote that I'll read from him. Um, when that there he makes a distinction between concealment from yourself, so to speak, and concealment from society, so that you can still act in society. Like versus, if you're by yourself, continuing to conceal things, because at that point, what he says it then splits off from consciousness as an independent complex to lead a separate existence in the unconscious, where it can be neither corrected or interfered with by the conscious mind. The complex is thus an autonomous portion of the psyche, which, as experience has shown, develops a peculiar fantasy life of its own. And I guess you could say that is the idea of dreams again, and that its dreams can illuminate these unconscious, concealed aspects of the psyche that continue to grow and develop their own being, so to speak. And I like the way that that's why I've always liked psychoanalysis, because rather than like taking a cognitive standpoint and looking at your brain and like from like a mechanistic view of process after process, a psychoanalytic approach is kind of like, no, like you're a collection of living sub personalities that all take characteristics of being into that have characteristics of being, because they are you and you're alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that with that perspective, it allows you to see a much more fluid, um, or you can see the fluid nature of your psyche. I feel like the ever shifting, adapting, and altering parts and relationships that happen with various parts of you. Like, because part of you might be hungry, another part of you might have to go to the bathroom. Those parts are going to have to figure out so that how they can both coexist in a harmonious way so that both goals can be achieved.
Mm-hmm.
And that can, I'm sure there's just countless examples of that with varying drives and motivations that we have.
Interesting. I wasn't. My mind was somewhere else. I was just thinking about the idea of the complex is thus an autonomous portion of the psyche, which, as experience has shown, develops a peculiar fantasy life of its own. Even the next sentence, we call this what we call this fantasy is simply spontaneous psychic activity, and it wells up whenever the repressive action of the conscious mind relaxes or ceases altogether, as in sleep. And like it's like the word fantasy almost confuses me a little bit, but then my understanding of like that part is like even when you're consciously repressing things, like I think he said it in the first chapter or in other readings, like the slip of the tongue or in sleep, like these things kind of pop up, and it's like what's interesting to me is like the more the more you repress things and the more these things take on like like their own type of like characteristics, and they kind of become their own complex is how he described it. It's like that becomes more of a problem though, because you're no longer in control of it. Like, does that sound right to you? Like
It's
part of that?
contradictory, but I agree with it. Like, because it is still you,
Like
so
it
to speak.
is, yeah.
But the we that we identify ourselves, you could say that process of us is different. The ability to think about thinking and you identify with that. And I think like it
Well,
depends on how
let's
you
put it this
identify
way. Let's
yourself.
put it this way. Like it is a part of you. It's part of your psyche. But the more it becomes its own thing within you, the less, almost like the less control you have over it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, like, I almost think fantasy is a funny word because, in a way, some of the things that I think we try to repress almost appear as fantasy because we wish that we could just act them out. And maybe, like, we just haven't found a way, or it's too much work, or we've created these reasons on why it's not okay to do so. So you like again, you end up letting this letting these repressions like kind of turn into this, as opposed to again acknowledging that this is something that's trying to come through you, it's trying to be expressed. And it's almost like if you were to find a way to do that, which again, like I think confession talks about it too, like just this idea of tapping into those things that we do repress, tapping into the unconscious. um, and what I was going to say is like when you do that, not only are you aware that these things are a part of you, but you begin to understand them, and you begin to understand what they mean and how they can be a part of your world, whether it's a thought or behavior or emotion, because you're able to process it, you're able to do all these things, as opposed to push it away and then let it turn into something else. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, the fantasy, like that word fantasy is always like, it's like you're pushing away the thing that's almost like fantasy for me has positive connotation. It's like it sounds
Mm-hmm.
like it's something that I would want to do or be involved in, yet you're denying yourself that.
Well, so yeah, you make me think of like in that regard as fantasy as a positive notation. Like I see it as like depending on what it is, like a lot of our repressions are probably not things that should be released as well. So there's a kind of I guess navigational wisdom that you need when going through that. But I think regardless, what we can say is to remain unconscious of any of it is far worse than, or is worse for your being than to continuously repress it, because whether it's, well, I guess maybe I'm thinking about this differently. Okay, I'm changing my line of thought right now. So um, if you're repressing something, whether it's something like me, like you could say like me repressing my drive to start this podcast with you, and like to open myself out and start creating some stuff and exploring that domain, like I could repress that. And so maybe like our repressions, or then I can also repress something that's like, well, um, the part of me that doesn't want to go to work and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
something to have to do with that, and I could repress
Right.
that. Now both of which I think by repressing them lead to a negative outcome, because if I repress doing this, what I know I love to do, now that especially now that we started doing it, then I could see that leading to like resentment, and that spontaneously emerges throughout my day and my expression that I don't really have any idea because I haven't been consciously aware of it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like those things when you're on edge and someone does the smallest thing and you freak out on them. It's like that's when it all comes up. So I
Right.
think in that sense, because I was going to say like, well, I'm sure some things being concealed, so to speak, are better than others, but I'm not exactly. I don't really agree with that anymore as I started thinking about that right there. Um, Now I'm sure that's like there's also some kind of healthy level of concealment where it's not that you're denying its existence entirely, but what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing is you're acknowledging it, accepting it, but remaining to keep it
Mm-hmm.
under control. And that gives you more ability to keep it under control by accepting the existence of it within you, because then you'll see it. If you didn't accept it, then you don't see it and you're blind to what you do, or actions that you take that are expressions of it.
Amen.
um, But yeah, so that's the power of power of confession and talking to somebody, and because it allows us, I mean, it allows you to bring forth all of that into conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, moving on to the next stage is sometimes like I what he one thing I also one thing is he didn't see, which I like because you um, earlier in this episode when I was talking about in like levels, it's not really like levels, but that each of these stages are their own thing in and of themselves and aren't entirely dependent upon each other, but based on the circumstances and the inexhaustive variability of individuals that will go through therapy, the chances of them starting at one stage or getting through one or getting stuck at another is going to vary greatly. Um, but where, so I guess where he moves into the next stage is that with confession, and once it's all realized, it's then just because you know the problem doesn't mean you know how to deal with it, so to speak. Or maybe you don't know the problem. Like maybe you're just starting to see that it's there. And so now you need to dive into it deeper and understand it more and explain it. And so this is where the explanation aspect comes in. You need to find out where he started talking about it.
Um, Stage 2 is like 42. See, because he like goes off and talks about fixation for a while.
Yeah, I noticed that. Oh, well, maybe we can um actually. Oh, yeah, yeah. So I was just about to dive
See,
into
now
that.
real quick, I gotta ask a question because I was under the impression that he was saying that these stages have sometimes in the past seemed like they were the answer. They were like the client could leave if they had like let's just say like a really good experience with like their stage of confession, which was like catharsis with Freud, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
go away and they feel better. But he was also saying like you have these other problems of like fixation that occur, and he was saying like the client could develop a dependent relationship on the therapist. And so because the therapist got them to that point, right? So it's almost like now they're attached to this person, and that ends up being a problem in itself. And I almost feel like that's why Jung presents these four stages, because he says it doesn't just end there. You have to explain to the client what is happening after the catharsis occurs. And that's when he kind of gets to stage two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was under the impression that I think he said somewhere in the chapter. I would have to find the highlight, but I think it's later in it too. He says like this idea of like there seems like there's like a finality to each stage, as if in some ways the client can feel like that was enough, right? Like whether it's going to see Freud and doing just having a cathartic experience and feeling like whoo, got that weight off my chest, like that's it, I'm good. And it's like, well, you're not really that good, or at least sometimes people aren't. um or he was saying like Adler had a totally different approach, and that people could just go there, but then they're also missing some things, and that's where he brings all these things together, was my interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that helps, but
No, I agree. I like it's good that you touched on fixation and like the matter of transference. And I guess the symbol that he used when how a patient could become fixated um, is like a symbology of the father or culture, is this kind of judgmental regulating force that approves behavior, so to speak, um, and that can be that role can be put upon the physician or the doctor. Um, and what it does is, like you said, it creates that dependence on the doctor from the patient in like a naive, childlike perspective where
mm-hmm.
you're still not autonomous um, and not and are not free to fully express yourself and take your own responsibilities for um, your thoughts and actions and personal growth.
Right. It's like a step in the direction, like you feel better, like, and it's almost like it prepares you to do the work, right? Like, because I almost feel like you can't do work when you're weighed down by all these things. And then when you get to that point, it's like now you really have to, again, take responsibility, take accountability for
Mm-hmm.
all these things that were weighing you down. And Yeah, and then he talks about explanation.
We can dive into uh, I guess like the what he touched on a little bit too is as we're shifting into explanation is or ending on the first stage with kind of the negative affinity that people have towards the idea of the shadow side as this
Hmm.
kind of all negative thing that to go there is to regress almost in attempting to go there,
Right.
um, but rather that there's a quote he said. Um, Nevertheless, psychology has profited greatly from Freud's pioneer work. It has learned that human nature has also a black side, and that not man alone possesses this side, but his works, his institutions, and his convictions as well. Even our purest and holiest beliefs can be traced back to the crudest origins. I think that's just, well, like you said, to deny a nature that lives within us is to, as we've kind of been talking about, I feel like I'm just regurgitating this viewpoint again, but to fail to see it and how it's hindering you and your society as large.
Hmm.
But that we need to overcome that idea of that, exploring the negative qualities of ourselves is somehow a bad thing, but rather we find a certain strength within them that we hadn't known about before.
Hmm. Hmm.
To as like how Peterson would describe it, like to not do that is to be like a rabbit. You're kind of just harmless and innocent, but
Hmm.
it's not exactly forthright or noble. But to encounter the shadow and integrate it and synthesize yourself with it is to gain strength and power and to use it on behalf of the good. And that's the, I guess, archetype. It's an archetypal pattern of behavior, like transformation of character for
Hmm.
the hero, so to speak, by integrating the malevolence that you're capable of and acknowledging it, but using it on behalf of the good.
Yeah.
Be a lion in the lion's pit.
Yeah. I mean, again, just acknowledging that it's there, right? And like that it's a part of the whole. And for me, it just went like, it's so funny because as we move through the chapter, the more the other stuff makes sense to me too, which is like, oh, there's this, they call it shadow side in the chapter. I just think like dark side of our personality, right? And it's like, so what does that really mean? It means that in confession, the things that you end up confessing are oftentimes these things that you can't believe that you would say. You can't believe that you would do it because you have this idea of like, that's dark, that's the dark side. Like, there's a reason that I repress that. And it almost sounds valid, right? It's like, yeah, why would I want these terrible parts of my personality to come through and exist? And you know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because I think your mind goes to, again, there's consequences for that, right? And there's repercussions, and it's like it makes you feel like, am I evil? Like, I think that's a question. It's like, well, I don't have to question about if I'm evil if I repress all the evil stuff. And it's like, and it's not saying that you're inherently evil. It's just saying there's something that is trying to be expressed in some way, shape, or form, and it's probably worth exploring and processing and understanding, and then seeing if there's some way to, again, think about like how you think or how you behave or just how you treat people. Like, is there a way to incorporate that side of yourself with the good and bad? Like, how can you balance out both of those? But if you just keep repressing that shadow side, then that's like, it's like the volcano that eventually erupts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just interesting. Like, as we move through it, the other things make more sense. um
And there's
yes.
another part that kind of he brings up is like ideas and the power of ideas and hindrance on therapy for the client can be holding on to preset ideas that hinder them and don't allow them to move forward, and then they get stuck again. There's a little quote that I'd like to read from him here.
Wait, what page? What page?
42. Second paragraph.
Okay.
Nothing influences our conduct less than intellectual ideas, but when an idea is the expression of psychic experience, which bears fruit in regions as far separated and as free from historical relation as East and West, we then must look closely, we must look into the matter closely. For such ideas represent forces that are beyond logical justification and moral sanction. They are always stronger than man in his brain. Man believes indeed that he molds these ideas, but in reality they mold him and make him their unwitting mouthpiece. So well, that made me think of
I feel like you're like taking a deep breath to get ready to explain that one. You're like, I'm going in.
wish me luck, soldier. um but yeah, so like ideas, like the
Hmm.
power of an idea. And I mean, countless wars have been fought over ideas, or um, you'll have like two human camps set up with fundamentally different ideas in terms of maybe a structure of society or structure of economy, and they're willing to go as far to hold on to those ideas as kill millions of people. And it's like it's a historical fact, and it's happened over and over again. And that's on a societal level, but you see similar issues come down with an individual level where possession by an idea, so to speak, maybe it gives you um, some kind of life force or something to hold on to, um, and provides meaning. But if you're unidimensional in your view of it, and you're solely looking at it and failing to update your structure and take in external viewpoints, um, and integrate it, then you'll fail to see the shortcomings of your own idea, and your behavior um, will hurt you, so to speak. And if you, in various situations where your idea on how to act or what the world is like is not stand up properly. And I guess this is like the idea, so to speak, like I'm a good person. And then so, well, if you go confront the unconscious and the shadow side, it's like immediately what you're going to find out that it's that there's parts of you that are and motivations and desires within you that do not seem very good at all or beneficent. And now, if you hold on to that idea that I'm a good person, now there's a distinction I'd like to make. Um, Now, I would say like the correction here would be to continuously become a better person. If you're holding on to I am a good person, then you blind yourself from transforming parts of you that could be better, and you miss that because you're not looking for it.
Right. Like, would you say that's the shadow side?
Yeah,
Right.
but yeah. So I love how he just hits things from multiple different levels. Um, that's all I have on that one.
Yeah, I can't speak too much on that one because I almost feel like there's more like he leads up to that. That's like the end of some of those thoughts. I might
Mm-hmm.
have to look at it again. But even just like that paragraph and that quote, I feel like there's more there that my mind's going, and I just can't talk about it yet.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I probably like um like well, I think what he's also hitting on in that paragraph, because like to see similar expression of psychic um, experience in places so far separated that they had no physical contact. Um, I guess what he's saying is pointing to some kind of underlying nature, some aspect of our nature that if it occurs in a pattern across many different societies, who of which were isolated against to each other, then it deserves uh, intense thought and meditation on, because
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be important.
I like that. You just made more sense for me.
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
I did the same for myself, but I tried.
Maybe it already made sense to you. I think we
Hopefully.
were in two different places there.
I love it. Hmm, hmm, hmm. Ah,
Stage three.
Alfred Adler. Maybe I can start us off with a little quote that kind of provides another issue of um, therapy, where he says, "Mere insight into themselves is sufficient for morally sensitive persons who have enough driving force to carry them forward. For those with little imagination for moral values, however, it does not suffice. These last are mentally disciplined people who grasp the truth of a reductive explanation, but cannot accept it when it merely invalidates their hopes and ideals. In these cases, also mere insight is insufficient." So it's like, so what's next? Well, education
Hmm. Hmm.
to make your ideals and hopes sufficient.
All right, I have a quote from this one to start off stage three. The Alderian school, with its educational intent, begins at the very point where Freud leaves off and thus helps the patient who has learned to see into himself to find the way to a normal life. It is obviously not enough for him to know how and why he fell ill, for to understand the causes of an evil does very little towards curing it. We must never forget that the crooked paths of a neurosis lead to as many obstinate habits, and that despite any amount of understanding, these do not disappear until they are replaced by other habits. But habits are only won by exercise, and appropriate education is the sole means to this end. The patient must be, as it were, prodded into other paths, and this always requires an educating will.
What page was that on?
Stage three, page 45, middle of the page is where it started.
Nice, nice. That was a good quote.
Yeah, just like I feel like sometimes he goes off and like starts talking about things that are a little over my head, but then some of them are just so straight to the point, and that one I feel like really gave you an idea of why this education is an important stage, and why he incorporates it.
Yeah, I think, like you said, um, talks about habits there, and habits are only won by exercise, like by actively implementing and changing, and where explanation can still leave you um, unknowing, so to speak, on how to act and um, maneuver. Like I feel like you're still, like you said, like the first two stages are they're very individual, so to speak, and very interpersonal or intrapersonal. And now it's, well, now that you have all of this, what do you do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And because you're a social being and you have responsibilities and things, and you have to figure out how to incorporate that. And I think that's, well, where Adler comes in, is in, educating yourself, developing the ability to do that.
I want to share a personal story
Hmm.
because it literally just made me think about it. But this idea of like when I was kind of going through my own transformation in my own life, I didn't even have a framework like this that was kind of set out for me that I could like think about these steps and these stages along the way and go, oh, like, are there things that I'm keeping bottled up that I'm not expressing, right? Am I being dishonest with myself? It's like I would ask those questions, but I wasn't thinking in my head, I need to start here.
Hmm.
That would kind of just happen. And then stage two, which was explanation. Sometimes people weren't there to explain the things that I was going through by myself. Like I wasn't seeing a therapist, right? Like he's talking about psychotherapy where the therapist is guiding you through this process. No one was there for me in that way. So I had to believe, I had to trust myself that I could explain some of them. But I also had people around me that when I began to confess and when I began to be true to myself and speak what was on my mind and share my ideas, no matter how ridiculous they might be, like when you start doing those things, you notice that the people around you, especially the people that you're close with and you have a very close bond with, they kind of provide some of those explanations and they help you put some of those pieces of the puzzle together. So in my own way, I was kind of going through these stages and not so much, I wouldn't say like a 1, 2, 3, 4. I would say like going up and down, right? Like not really ever knowing that there was stages that you could follow that may be more effective than what I was doing. But I was definitely experiencing these kind of things when I decided to start working on myself. And then the education part is interesting because, in a literal sense, I got hit with this idea that I needed to go back to school. And not that I need to be in school, but I wanted to. And that implies education and learning. And there was something about the place that I was at that said, I've worked through X amount of things, and now I'm ready to carve a different path. I'm ready to go a different way because if I go the same path, then I do everything that I was doing and I don't change. So in a way, like I found myself at this stage three of education as well, in a metaphorical sense. Like I wanted to learn more, but I also literally was in school getting an education. And that was, in a way, something that provided me with, you're going to create a different version of yourself, which again, for me, leads to transformation, which is the fourth stage. And we don't have to get into that yet. But I just want to share that story because that just really paints a picture of whether you're in therapy or not, if you decide to work on yourself, those things kind of take place. And I think like what's awesome about this is he is kind of creating this systematic way for you to kind of maybe achieve some of those goals quicker and more effectively than someone like me just being lost and just kind of going in and out of these stages, so to speak. Um, but it's just this chapter, I feel like I haven't articulated this to anyone, but this is why this chapter like hit me in a weird way, but I couldn't fully understand it all. But it's very personal to me too, because of all those things that I went through and how he talks about them. So
I
yeah.
love it. Um, no, that was awesome. Because, like, I loved how you described it as kind of like consistently shifting through various stages and cycles of it, and that the order isn't linear by um, any means. Um, and that I think like there's by giving by not setting in stone, like there's a freedom that comes with that by kind of taking shifting through the stage that may be um, most fitting, and like by not having a set kind of direction, you allow yourself to use one or the other as it best meets the situation at hand and what you're trying to do and like where you are. And it's like, it seems like in your case that it was almost like you were already doing it, but you just, like you said, you didn't have it articulated. And um, there's a quote that I wanted to read from him. He is also a man. His thinking, to be sure, may be limited to his spatial field, but in his behavior he exerts the influence of a complete human being. Without being clearly conscious of it or giving it a name, he unwittingly does a great deal in the way of explanation and education, and other analysts do as much in the way of catharsis without raising it to the level of principle. So you can, like you go, like you said, like you were doing this already, but you didn't have any kind of principle that you were finding, that you were holding and saying, okay, I'm going to go do that. You were already shifting through it. So like it makes me think that like like we've known this and we've been embodying it to some degree. That's
Mm-hmm.
another one of those examples when right now we're illuminating it. And like you said, like I'm doing the same thing. Like I'm thinking about past experiences where I went through a similar process, like a panic attack, and you know, where I was after that, and kind of you know, I had to confess to myself what was going on. And
Mm-hmm.
then I'd say, and then I shifted into like an explanation, um, and then it was almost interesting. I feel like, and then I went transformation and then education.
Hmm.
So I didn't really, I never went back. Like I never tried to. I just pulled out completely
Yeah.
from the social action for a while, and I was able to do it at the time period. Um, and so that was interesting too. It's seeing that make me think of like, and with other different examples in my life, I'm seeing a different order crop up as I kind of go through that time period, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
But
That's interesting because I do believe that that happens sometimes, that the transformation kind of just
I think
takes
it
place.
start.
And I think, again, but I think what's interesting too is this is goes hand in hand with Peterson stuff. The idea of being the fool and starting over. And like, I sometimes I feel like when a transformation, it almost feels spontaneous and like, boom,
Mm-hmm.
it occurs, right? And then you decide to change your path. And let's just say that that all of a sudden turns from transformation to education, like you were saying. You're all the way at the beginning because of the new path, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're going a completely new endeavor and you are the fool, but the transformed being understands that, right? Like the transformed
Yes.
being is up for that challenge, which is the beauty of it. So it's
Oh
kind of cool
yes.
that that can kind of take place too. It's almost like I almost think like when the roles are reversed, like when education comes before transformation, if that does happen that way, that it's almost like maybe like that spontaneous transformation is when like something happens that was unexpected and it does pull you out of maybe like a dark place that you were in very quickly. And the thing is for me, it's like my one spontaneous kind of transformation. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't plan it out. It was spontaneous and like I'm forever changed by it, right? But I don't think I could have worked up to that the same way. Like I feel like the education to transformation is a totally different, more of like a conscious path that like
Yes.
it's a more balanced way of getting to transformation
Mm-hmm.
without having to go through something
Mm-hmm.
like, let's just say, like a near death experience. It's like those are things that happen, you know, like let's just say you're like almost OD'd or something, like you're a drug addict and you almost OD. And then that scares the shit out of you to the point where, boom, that's the transformative moment. And you give up drugs and you change your life around. Well, after you change your life around, that's you're educating yourself. Now you're building a foundation and you're living a life without drugs. But if it was the other way around, it would be a much slower process of like, let me decide to give up drugs, but then you do, and then you go back, and then you do, and it's like, and then maybe eventually you transform. But it
Mm-hmm.
seems like it might be harder to do it that way, but it's also possible. I don't know. This is an interesting conversation.
No, yeah, I have a lot to build off of that. It's it's gradual versus sudden enlightenment. It's the
Yeah.
religious experience. That's what it
Yep.
is.
Yeah.
Instantaneous transformation. It's what the Eastern religions, um, for the most part, and just like blatantly so, are about trying to deceive. Not all of them. A lot of them, like you have different sects, and even in Christianity, it has its branches of mysticism where they have developed various rituals and prayers, so to speak, that will induce very mystic states of consciousness where your brain activity alters, like in various regions, can alter up to like 40%. And so there's one experience specifically um, that has been described by neuroscience. Andrew Wahlberg and Andrew Newman, and Mark Wahlberg. They have a book called "How Enlightenment Changes Your Brain: The New Science of Transformation," and basically, what they've been doing for the past couple of decades is just doing brain scans on people performing varieties of various religious exercises or spiritual rituals, meditations, yogas, and they monitor their brain activity and see what happens. Well, there are a couple different um, rituals that produce a dramatic drop in your parietal lobe, or part of your parietal lobe that's associated with um, orienting yourself in space and
Mm-hmm.
time. So, like, to say that
Mm-hmm.
like this pen is not my self, that this is my hand,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a boundary, and then the pen is different from my hand. Now, if you just deactivate that brain region, well, you can't tell the difference between you and anything else. So you are perceiving yourself as everything, and everything is you,
Mm-hmm.
and it reflects itself. And then after that, I mean, those kinds of meditations are as powerful as a psychedelic experience in transformation, right? And it's like, and you don't need the psychedelic experience to have those transformations either. It's like that's another thing. And a big thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is that um, Western psychotherapy has completely overlooked the power of instantaneous transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that we put most of our emphasis on gradual enlightenment, so to speak, where, you know, like we were talking about, you take the time, you have all these problems and all these issues, and it's going to take you many, many sessions to kind of uncover, and you're going to have to dive through all of your dreams and look into all of this when um, in reality, you could get to the same place in a fraction of the time instantaneously. Now, there's always a spontaneous element of that, so to speak, but there are a lot of techniques and things that you can do to get there. Um, there's one kind of meditation that you can do that I can talk about. So basically, if you pair a body movement with a repetition of a word or something, so it's like I think it's a Sufi ritual, but what they do is they sit on like crisscross applesauce, put their kind of backs of their hands on their knees, and they hold their fingers up and they go satanama, 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 and you do that over and over again. You continuously do it, and usually around 15 to 20 minutes of doing it is when you feel a loss of sense of voluntary control, and you have like your frontal lobe shifts in brain activity, and the frontal lobe is like everyday like decision making mind, so
Mm-hmm.
it fluctuates a little bit, and then at some point if you continue with it, that could induce uh, a massive drop in your parietal lobe, which produces the religious experience.
Hmm.
But I've done it a lot, and I've gotten there a couple times. It hasn't happened every time. It's usually been like the moments were so they were so brief, but also and like timeless at the same time. Like I felt like I was in that moment forever, but then also only for a second,
Yeah.
and I like pull out of it. Um,
I have
but
something to say to like just challenge some of this.
come at me.
Um, like when you're explaining that to me, it sounds like you can get to a place that by meditating that almost I feel like allows like let's just say like a transformation is taking place. Like if you want to say that like the way you measure brain activity and what your brain's doing is a form of transformation taking place, it's like okay, then like there's something going on there. But what is like what also represents the transformation after the fact? Like when you come out of that meditation, what are the parts of yourself, like a person that goes to
Mm-hmm.
therapy, that you want to work on? And did you meditate and just get to that place and feel, blissful for a moment? Or do you come out of that and you actually have changed, and the things that you were wanted to work on are no longer an issue. Because for me, that represents transformation. And I think there's part of like just that idea that like that the meditation can make you feel a certain way, but you still, again, have to put work in after
Hmm.
it's all said and done, right?
Hmm.
Like you don't just get up from meditating and like, are those things just gone? Or do
Well,
you still have to work at doing things differently, right?
you become God and then you're done. No, no, that was great. I have a lot to say on that.
I
So
think
yeah.
this is why, real quick, just to finish what I was saying. This is why I love that. I don't think he's saying each of these stages in and of itself are enough. I think what he's saying is they're all a part of what we are and what we could be. And I think what he's doing is proposing a framework that, yes, like he takes all these other approaches, picks and pulls, and like puts his own together. And he's saying that these are the fundamental things that are going to be the most effective in creating this better version of yourself, in dealing with the neurosis, in understanding it, in educating yourself, and then transforming and knowing that you are no longer that person because you've went through all these steps. And then after the transformation takes place, you understand that you are a different person and that you've worked hard for that, and that it's just a longer process, right? As opposed to sometimes I feel like when the meditation, when people bring that up, I feel like sometimes it could be assumed that if I just meditate for a few minutes, then that's enough. And it's like, I just feel like that's part of it. I feel like that's just, you know,
My perspective here is that both of those are super powerful tools. And for me, in my perspective of, when I sit down and I meditate and I come out of that, it's as if I am refreshed or rebirthed in a way in how I'm interacting with the world and how I'm interacting with myself and allowing myself to express and and um and understanding myself. And now I think fundamentally the most clear word to describe what that can produce is just a drop of resistance, where
mm-hmm.
then you can much more easily go and understand other aspects of yourself and, confession, so to speak, um, and then understand them and explain them out and
Mm-hmm.
then act and educate. But I think throughout that whole time, the difference with having some kind of instantaneous refresh or
Mm-hmm.
transformation, where it can happen psychologically, but it doesn't mean that you're just going to eradicate all your old bad habits. However, it could that happens too. People will
Yeah.
have an experience like that and drop a 40-year smoking addiction that they've tried to drop multiple times could never drop, or break out of
Right.
major depression when they could not figure out how to do it for years. And it's like, so
Yeah.
that's also an element of that. So it could happen, yes.
Right.
So, but I think like the combination of both of those. But one thing that I think always happens, or that I think happens more consistently than not, with continuous meditation or religious type ritual, um, is that you find a newfound um, vitality and sense of creative expression. Like I've noticed just that I allow my vitality to express itself, so to speak, in a way like, well, I could sit here and I play video games for another hour because I know I have work in an hour. But, I was just sitting in that silence, and when I came out, what I really want to do right now is just go outside and do some reading, sit in nature for a little bit and calm myself and enjoy it for the sake of enjoying it. It's just like, I think that the meditation or religious spiritual ritual, whether beliefs are irrelevant here, um, that shit, I lost my train of thought.
I like what you're saying.
Beliefs are irrelevant. It can work
Creative
either way.
expression, meditation. All right, well, let me say something while you think of it, because
Yeah,
I feel
I
like
just think.
I love what you're saying, because I think there's an aspect of these spiritual practices that work in the same way that psychedelics do, which is you get to a place you get to a place when you're either meditating or taking a psychedelic, that when you come back from it, you're very aware of how judgmental you are about the things that you do. You're very aware about the defenses that you have, right? Like, and I think like you just said it, it's like after I meditate, I might want to just go outside and read as opposed to like play video games, which is just one example among, we can name countless examples. But the point is sometimes even me, like this is something that I've experienced, is like maybe I'm not outside reading because there's other people around, and it's almost like you can already feel them looking at you and like, what is that person doing out there just reading? Or like, and another example that I have, and this is personal, this is the way that I've experienced these feelings and me judging myself. It's like I went to the beach by myself one day and I just really wanted to do yoga, and I literally had to talk myself into doing it. And it's like I didn't need to meditate because I was already in a place where like I knew what I wanted to do, and I was aware that my own thoughts were preventing me from doing it because I was preventing myself from doing it for fear of judgment by others. But that judgment should not matter. If you just are and you're just doing yoga, you should be happy with doing it when, where, anytime. You just fucking do it, right? And I think that's like something that you were hitting on, is like you just don't let those judgments affect you anymore, and your reality changes. All of a sudden you become the person that you want to be because you don't give a fuck. Like, and I think I'm saying that we're talking about things like yoga, like not things that are going to affect other people, right? Going out, reading a book out in public, or just doing anything, playing piano in front of people, another thing like that I deal with. Just not giving a fuck. It's like I'm not harming anybody. I'm just being creative. I'm expressing myself in different forms. And I feel like that is something that those experiences have taught me. And it's changed my life. I think it's changed my life even going back to school, because I used to tell myself, I'm too old to go back to school. And now I'm like, fuck that idea. Get that idea. Why is that even in there?
Hell yeah, brother.
Why do I care? Why do I care? Like, if someone, like, let's say I met you, I'm walking down the hallway and you're like, you're 33 and you're at Towson University, I'd be like, fuck off. But back in the day, I'd be like, yeah, why am I here? I'd be embarrassed. I would get flushed in the face. I'd be embarrassed because that's an indicator that that bothers me so much, or that it did, right? And I think that's the difference between getting to that place and then transcending that old version of yourself.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that's where the dropping resistance comes from. Like you said, like you free yourself to go do that without hindrance.
Yeah.
And then you can really do it. And then you can also, I think with that, you can avoid pain that it can cause, because you're mindful and you're doing it all on without necessarily like affirmation or denial of whatever it is, but just acceptance that it's there, and that um, you know where you want to go. And I think part of that also is that there's a sense of clarity that comes with that. Like you said, like um, it's in tandem with not giving a fuck what other people think.
Yeah.
There's clarity that comes with that,
Yeah.
because what happens is what you get rid of is you get rid of this entanglement of your own self-consciousness. That is what it actually is. It's like there's a quote. It's like, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. You're projecting
Right.
your own judgments um, of character onto you, hidden through the guise of other people. That's completely illusory. So you also are seeing people in the way where you think people are seeing you, but in reality, it's how you're seeing yourself, unless
Yeah.
you're actually sitting down and genuinely talking to them. And then it's like, and then like that can be a good or a bad thing. It's like, well, I feel like there's an element of play with it where you can walk around and be like, oh yeah, you're looking at me and you think I'm having a great day, aren't you? It's like, there's like that's just happening. So it's like it's going to happen too, and that resistance to what is happening and just interacting with it allows you to see it for what it really is, and then do what you want with it.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah. No, I just again, yeah, I don't know. This is one of those things where like I'd love to hear other people's stories, right? Because
Hmm.
I think a lot of us have probably experienced that in some way, shape, or form. And
Hmm.
yeah, I don't
Yeah, I'd
know.
say like mine right now is kind of like, I just finished undergrad, and like I did really good, and like everyone's like, "Oh, where are you going now? Like, what school are you gonna go to? You gonna get a job?" It's like people are throwing me job stuff, and like it's just like because it's always just a push into the uniform direction or the conveyor belt lifestyle, one next thing after the next with no
Right.
break. And when in reality, it's like there's an insight that I made. I think you could say it was stage transformation. Um, my second to last semester was probably one of my hardest semesters because I had like orgo. I had like a 5 class load with like orgo independent research, and there was like the whole online shit was going on. But at some point towards the end of the semester, when I was like, that semester broke me like twice. It was rough. Broke
Mm-hmm.
my Xbox one night and at 3 a.m. Took a dumbbell and smashed it. It was great. That was also a cathartic moment too, though. The next morning when I woke up, but there's an insight that I made. I was like, I was at a park running, and I have tremendous amount of insights during like exercise or periods of running. But
Mm-hmm.
regardless, the insight that hit me just kind of swelled up from wherever thoughts come from. Don't really know, but it was it was just there is no rush,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just like, because I mean, in that process, and we're pushing such a fast paced lifestyle on each other, and where we are fully focused on the quantity of work that we can produce in the short amount of time possible versus just enjoying the process of in and of itself. And kind of I feel like we're losing our touch of the aesthetic or like beauty in life, and we're trading it for a mechanistic lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
mean
yes, it's a
you
little
don't
rant.
allow yourself time to do all these things like this chapter is all about psychotherapy. And for me it's, well, why does psychotherapy even exist? And I think that's a big reason is we don't even allow ourselves the time to sit with these things, to explore ourselves a little deeper. We are constantly on the go. And when we're not on the go, our life is full of distractions to entertain us in the meantime, and you have to work really hard. I just had a podcast with a friend of mine about massage therapy. In that, we were talking about neglecting the body. I think here we're talking more about neglecting the mind, but
Spirit.
they also both, yeah, spirit too, and but they all go hand in hand. But my point is in a society where that is the norm, that we're just go go go, turning and burning, you have to create that time for yourself. And I think that's something too where I do believe that it's becoming, people are tapping into the idea that we should take our mental health more seriously. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that becomes integrated into our society years to come, because I think it's going to be more and more of a priority. Like a perfect example is you have a place like Google where they have like sleep pods where people are working a lot, but they also are providing a space for people to go rest. So that's like, okay, let's not have our employees experience burnout, right? Like let's do things to help either mitigate some of these problems or to really push us in a direction where we're prioritizing our health, and productivity increases because of it. Just things along those lines. But I just think it's really cool. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I love it. Um, I do not have too much time left, but try and find a nice little quote towards the end. Well, I mean, there's one part that we haven't touched on yet, which is kind of like the self education of the doctor himself throughout the therapy process to
Mhm.
continuously. Let me just touch on it for a second. But
I have a good
that
quote for that stuff if you don't have
yeah,
one.
go for it.
Do you have one you wanted to read?
I was looking for one, but I haven't found one that I underlined yet. Saw you.
This one that I highlighted said, we should expect the doctor to have an influence on the patient in every effective psychic treatment, but this influence can only take place when he too is affected by the patient. You can exert no influence if you are not susceptible to influence. It is futile for the doctor to shield himself from the influence of the patient and to surround himself with a smokescreen of fatherly and professional authority. And that's just I read something this past semester. It was an interview with I think Irvin Yalom, an existential psychotherapist, and or maybe it's Carl Rogers, but either way, just talking about this idea of like it was a story that they were being mentored by somebody and they were doing group therapy, and the therapist was proud that after 10 years, he said something along the lines of like, yeah, all these people changed and I haven't changed at all. And he was like proud of that. He was proud that he wasn't affected by these people. And I think it was Yalom. Yalom's response to that story was, for the interview's sake, was he was so disappointed, and he just knew like that's not that's not what should be taking place. Like that you should not be affected by these people. It's like as much as you're helping, like it's a collaborative experience. And as much as you're helping them, they're helping you to grow in ways that you can't even understand. Um, so again, I do love that he brought that up because for me, this is a portion of Young that reminds me of someone like Carl Rogers, and obviously like Irvin Yalom's response to that story, and just talking about how important it is for the therapist to understand that yes, you have a lot of knowledge in these areas, but every patient, every client is unique, and that you can go into it, but like you should not force these theories. You should not try to make them fit into this theoretical assumption that you have. Instead, you should gather information, follow these steps that he kind of proposes, and then open yourself up to this idea that what can I learn from this person? What can we teach each other? Um, and I just love that he brought that up in this chapter.
No, I love that. No, it's like that's like something that um, I guess you could say from a more selfish standpoint is why like I feel that my trajectory is heading towards like being a clinical psychologist or counseling psychologist of some nature where I help people transform themselves. Um, and that like you said, everyone's so variable and no one's going to have the same problem. There might be various like expressions of something similar. There might be some kind of common element to it, but it's never going to be the exact same. And there's and with like the experience that you'll get from these through these individuals, they'll pass their experience on to you, and then it's as if you have the opportunity in front of you to continuously broaden your scope of understanding in in identifying um, expressions of the psyche that produce problems or whatever, and then using that for your own strength to do that for yourself. And you can, and I'm sure like because like when someone tells you a sad story about them, or something like that. It's like you get emotional because you know the feeling, and the feeling, when that feeling wells up within you, it's also attached to the things that created you to feel that way. And so that will be attached with that. And then it's going to come out. And I guess it's like, that's a terrifying thing when, like that, when that therapist said that he hasn't changed in 10 years, because then it's just like, well, it makes me think that he probably did a lot of damage in the process of trying to help.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to. I think it's more difficult to not to truly help somebody in a genuine way without hindering them in some other kind of way.
Well, I think how can you really go through those stages of even confession, right? How can you go through the stage of confession and pretend to be empathetic toward your client when you've already made up your mind about what is going on? You're just waiting for your turn to say, this is your problem, this is the answer. And then for stage two, you're only going to explain it in the way that you think is right. And then for stage three, you're only going to educate them in the way that you think they should be educated, not what's best for them or how they learn best or what they need to learn. And then stage four, like, does that transformation even take place if the person doesn't feel like they connected or felt trusted, like they were building a relationship when they confessed, that they really understood your explanation, or what they've actually learned along the way when it doesn't really kind of fit them, it just fits the ideas of the therapist, you know? How those things don't even take place. I almost feel like there's I almost feel like they don't take place and the client isn't even aware that they're not taking place. You know?
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I could certainly see that. Um, well, let me end with some final thoughts from Jung. Um, Trying to figure out where to start. Our civilization is still young, and we therefore required all the devices of animal tamer to make the defiant barbarian and the savage in us, and to make the defiant barbarian and the savage in us in some measure tractable. But when we reach a higher cultural level, we must forego compulsion and turn to self development. For this, we must have knowledge of a way or method, and so far we have known of none. It seems to me that the findings and experiences of analytical psychology can at least provide a foundation. For as soon as psychotherapy requires the self perfecting of the doctor, it is freed from its clinical origins and ceases to be a mere method for treating the sick. It is now a service of the healthy as well, for at least those who have a right to psychic health and whose illness is at most the suffering that tortures us all. For this reason, we may hope to see analytical psychology become of general use, more so even than the methods which constitute its preliminary stages and which severally carry a general truth. But between the realization of this hope and the actual present, there lies an abyss over which no bridge is to be found. We have yet to build it stone by stone. I just got read the last page there.
Yeah.
um, but yes, however, I think that we're getting there with that bridge. This
Mm-hmm.
book older than not, so I think we've made some progress. And you know, um, starting with Maslow, like we had the sick half with Freud, Jung, um, and Adler about returning to normality, and we need the second half, which is to go to a therapist for the sake of becoming self-actualized and just transforming yourself, not just to shift back into normality. And Jung talks about how there are individuals who you could say need the abnormal life to reach their own fulfillment, and those who will become bored if they follow the societal norms. And I think that that is more so within everybody or not. It's just a matter of if it's expressed or not, and given the ability to express itself.
Yeah.
And I mean, that comes with, you know, persevering transformation of character and psyche.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
Well, any other concluding thoughts, sir? I have to go to work in a little bit.
Nah, I like where the conversation goes as always.
It was a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we really, again, eventually get into connecting our own lives with these ideas. Because again, we're not therapists, so we're not like, but in a way, we could be aspiring therapists if that's, a goal that we have. So again, I think this is more relevant to people like us, but at the same time, we've obviously experienced these things outside of therapy. And I think a lot of people can probably also relate to it. So I think um, it's definitely something there. So it's been fun.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, sir, until next time, I'll talk to you soon.